My father was born in 1928. His parents came from Italy, and my grandmother named him after the famous actor Rudolph Valentino. She and my father looked so much alike, and he joined the military at 17. He was so young, but he aced all of the exams they gave him, and they put him directly into officers candidate school, and he was an officer by the age of 18. He was a second lieutenant. I always thought my dad resembled the actor Errol Flynn so much. I thought he was so handsome. He was in the Korean War before I was born, and he earned a Silver Star there for his actions. And when I was came along, I just remember him being the most wonderful father. Here I am, bald, and then here we are in Germany when I was a toddler, and that's my mother and older sister in the picture. And then here's another picture a few years later. I really like this because I think my dad was laughing, and he rarely laughed during a photo, so I really enjoy that. And then this picture is really how I remember him before he left for Korea the last time, and unfortunately, he did not come back. So I shared those photos with you and the some of the information about my dad because I really wanted to highlight how exceptional a person he really was. My father was an exceptional person. He was highly intelligent. He was obviously very good looking, but he was also an incredible person. His the men in his units when he was in the military and he was an officer, they really loved him. He was really well liked among the men under him. He was really well liked among his peers. I don't know of anybody that didn't like my father. And that's an incredible thing to say about somebody. I'm certainly not like that. I don't know too many people like that. But he was that kind of person. He was a kind person, but he was a larger than life person. There was something, my father died an early death. He died at the age of he would have been 37 the month after he died. And he crammed so much life into those years. We always say it's a shame someone died because they didn't get to live, which is tragic. But my father had so much life. He lived more in 36 years than most people do in twice that amount of time. And so I don't really feel like he was robbed of anything, if that makes sense. I mean, from my standpoint, I was robbed. I was robbed of a wonderful father, but I don't feel like he was robbed. I really feel like he lived the life he was supposed to live. And he did everything that I think he really wanted to do. I mean, yes, if he had lived longer, he would have been a grandfather and, other things he would have had a second career possibly. There's a lot of things that would have happened to him if he had lived longer. But I think he had the best of it. He had like the best of life. He was really healthy. He was relatively young when he died. He'd already accomplished so much in his life. So anyway, I wanted to share here some memories, couple of memories I have, specifically of my connection with him and events we did together. And the title of this video is not clickbait. I'm going to get to that at the end. I am going to share with you a really, really, truly amazing story that I've always wondered about. And I'll just leave it at that for now. I'll get to it here in a couple of minutes. But I wanted to share a first memory of my dad and I did a lot of things together. He had a little Volkswagen Bug, and we always tooled around on the weekends together. I was really daddy's girl. I really was. And we would tool around in the Bug, and we'd wash it together and that sort of thing. We'd go to the movies, just the two of us, because both of us were history buffs. We loved history. And any kind of movie that came out that was history related, we would end up going to see that. But we loved horses, both my father and I. And my father was an accomplished equestrian. He actually had been in events in the Army where he won medals and things like that. He was very, very accomplished on horseback. And I loved horses from an early age. I still love horses, actually. I haven't ridden in a long time now, but I do love horses. And so when I was really young, he wanted to teach me how to ride. And I probably should have had regular lessons or something, but I didn't actually have those until after he died. And then I did go through some actual horseback riding lessons. But he would take me out, and usually there was a stables on the army, camp or whatever. And so we would go out, and I know that my dad was really concerned because I had, as much as I loved horses, I had a tremendous fear of horses, and actually continued to have a kind of a fear of horses until I was really an adult, and then for some reason was able to overcome it. But tremendous fear of horses. I mean, they were huge and I was little, and it was a thing. So my dad would go up to the people at the stables, and he would specifically, and I heard him say this, he would say, now my daughter, she's just learning, and please give her, the most gentle horse you have. And I don't know if they just had a perverse sense of humor or what, but I never got what I thought was the most gentle horse. Of course, now knowing the way horses pick up on your fear, I think the horses were just reacting to the fact that I was afraid. But I always had some weird problem. I had a horse that bucked on me, and I had a horse that reared up, and I would have all these horse problems. And my poor dad, he did everything he could to try to make the experience better for me. He even exchanged horses with me a couple times. And of course, the minute he would exchange the horse that I had been riding was perfect, rode just perfectly. And then the one he traded me with, traded for, would start acting up, of course. And, I don't know that my dad ever had the talk with me about maybe they're picking up on your fear, but maybe he should have. Anyway, he had tremendous patience and understanding, and I still enjoyed it. And, amazingly, never fell off a horse. Still to this day, knock on wood, have never been thrown from a horse or fallen off a horse. I could stick like glue to those things. I really could. So I do remember that as being one of the most amazing memories with my dad. And then the other thing I remember is it's actually it's not as big encompassing a memory, but I remember my dad and I both had a great sense of humor. Of course, everyone in my family really had a great sense of humor, but he loved the comics on Sundays. And that was kind of a special time for he and I, because everybody would have breakfast, but then my dad would take the comics, and he and I would sit on the couch, and and I would cuddle up close to him. And when I was too young to read, he would read me the comics and kind of act them out. And when I was old enough to read, we would kind of trade off, and he would read some and I would read some, and we'd just laugh and laugh and laugh, because it was just, it was the best time. Of course, I think comics were better back then than they are now, but anyway. So I do remember that as well. So those are a couple of memories, really fond memories I have of my dad. And, the loss of him, it's been well over 50 years. The loss of him still feels new sometimes. It still feels so new. And that's why, as many of you know, I used to do bereavement counseling. And people would ask me, well, when does the pain go away from losing, my loved one or whatever it was? And I'd say, well, when it ever does, I'll let you know. Because when you really love someone so much and so completely, you don't ever get over it. You don't. You learn to live with it. You deal with it. You move on in your life, but you don't really get over it. So this last story I'm going to share with you about my father relates to the title of the video. And it's something that's troubled me. And not troubled me because I feel guilty or because I think anything happened that wasn't supposed to happen or something like that. But it is a testament, I believe, to the depth of my father's love, his commitment to being my father, and to some unknown factor in the whole thing. So let me get into it. I didn't know of this at the time. When I was a child, young child, 1 or 2 years old, earlier than I remember. I was very ill. I was born with a lot of lung problems and in and out of the hospital till I was 3 years old. And at one point, I died. And actually, the night during which I died, my the doctors had sent my parents home from the hospital, and they had just told my parents to pray, and they had basically said they didn't think I would make it till morning. And I did die during that night, and they did resuscitate me, and I did make it through, and so obviously I'm here. Um, but the part I didn't know until years later, and this was after my father had died, and my mother told me this maybe when I was around 25 maybe years old. I know I was an adult when she told me this. And I'm not sure why she didn't tell me earlier. Maybe she thought I would feel guilty. Maybe she thought I could handle it better as an adult. I have no reason to doubt the story because it sounds like my father. And my mother did have a way of bending the truth, shall we say, at times, but I don't believe this was an untrue story. So, according to my mother, the night that I was in the hospital and I was on the verge of dying, my parents were at home and neither of them could really sleep. And at one point in time, my father went downstairs. They lived in a 2-story, like a townhouse on the Army base. And my father went downstairs, and my mother, I think, just assumed he went down to get some coffee or tea or milk or whatever. But he didn't come back up, and so she went downstairs after a little while to check on him. And she said as she got to the bottom of the stairs, she saw my dad in the living room, and he was on his knees, and he was praying. And he was praying out loud. He didn't know my mother was there. I don't know if she told him that she heard this later. I don't remember if she ever told me that. But at the time, he didn't know she was there. And she heard him out loud praying for my life, praying that I would not die. And part of what he said was, he said, God, take me instead of her. Take me instead of her. And that blows my mind, actually. I mean, I know parents would think that. They might even say it out loud, but to know that my father said that with all honesty and fervor of in the moment, and I think in that moment he honestly would have given his life for me. And so when he said that to God, of course my mother heard it. Again, I don't know if she, I don't know if she went back upstairs at that point. I don't remember what she told me. But it moved her because she even told me, she goes, I wasn't even asking God for that. Like, and that was my mother. So, yeah. But when she told me, there were many layers to that for me emotionally. So the first thought was, so God waited 10 years and then he took my father. Like, so God took him up on that? Like, that was the first, of course, thought that comes to my mind. And then there was also some guilt, thinking, well, I'm alive now because my father traded himself for me. But then I realized that's ridiculous. I can't feel guilty because I was just a baby, young child at the time. And then there was some anger, like with God, that why would God do that? Why would he take someone's life in exchange for someone else's life? So there were a lot of questions and emotions and everything surrounding it. And of course, I've had many years to adjust to that, to adjust to the story. And I really believe it's just a testament of my father's love for me. I don't really believe that his life was taken 10 years later in exchange for mine. I don't really think that's how it works with God. But that's my belief system. Everybody has different beliefs. I don't believe that's it. I think my dad probably was destined to have a shorter life anyway. That's, because if you are a person of faith, of any kind of faith, you believe that there's a plan of some kind. And so I was destined to live, and my father was destined to die when he did. So that's how I've made peace with it. But the thing about it that stays with me, that is a good thing, is knowing the depth of my father's love for me. Knowing my father loved me so much that in that moment, he would have died for me. I mean, that's a powerful, powerful thing. Because although many parents may say that, I'm not sure how many really would do that. And I do know my father, I knew him well enough to know he meant it. My father never said anything lightly. He didn't just say things and then later regret it or things like that. He said them with a purpose, and I think he really believed in what he was offering. So I'll leave you with that today. I hope you've enjoyed this about my father. I'm sure there are times I will mention him again, but I wanted to dedicate this to him because Father's Day is almost upon us, and every Father's Day I think of him. Every Father's Day I think of the loss of him. And I don't think there's anything I could ever do that would be enough to honor him. And so until next time, be well, keep moving forward, take care, bye.